You didn't take a wrong turn. You followed the map they gave you. Perfectly. You learned the rules early. Be good, be useful, be impressive. You measured yourself in gold stars and silence. And somewhere along the way, you stopped asking if the path you were on was even yours. Now here you are, 40, maybe close. And everything around you looks like the picture of a life. But something underneath is cracking, not loudly, quietly, like a mirror spidering from the inside. You've done everything right, and still you feel like a ghost inside your own story. You find yourself staring at your life like a photograph someone else took. It's framed well, balanced, bright, but it doesn't feel like you're in it. Not really. You wake up with a weight you can't name. Not sadness, not fear, something heavier. The weight of pretending. At first it's easy to dismiss. A season, a phase, maybe you're just tired. But the feeling grows. It comes in the quiet moments. In the pause after the call ends, in the drive home. In the silence before sleep, it's a voice. Not loud, not angry, just patient. And it says, "This isn't you." That's the moment. That's where the old map ends. Because the path forward doesn't begin with another achievement. It begins with a question, one you've been too afraid to ask. What if the life you built was never really yours? As Carl Jung said, life really does begin at 40. Up until then, you are just doing research. And now the research is over, no more performing, no more striving to be acceptable, no more dimming the parts of you that don't fit the script. The mirror didn't crack to destroy you. It cracked so you could finally see the truth underneath. You're not falling apart, you're falling in. And what you're beginning to feel isn't failure. It's the whisper of a self you buried to survive, rising to speak again. You can pretend a little longer, or you can start listening. Because the life you built may be admired. But the life that's calling you now, the one beneath the noise, is real, and it's time. This is where the fear begins to bargain. You've heard the whisper, you've seen the crack. You know somewhere deep that something's shifting. But now the voice of resistance shows up, reasonable, rational, insidious. You're just tired. Other people have it worse. You should be grateful. You're too old to start over. It sounds like protection. But it's really paralysis disguised as wisdom. Because change, real change, doesn't ask for permission. It demands truth. And the truth is, you're not burned out because you worked too hard. You're burned out because you abandoned your own alignment for too long. Because you've spent years trying to be everything for everyone while forgetting yourself entirely. There's a woman named Anna. She's 42, 2 kids, a steady job. A partner who loves her. On paper, she's fine. Lately, she started crying during commercials. Not the sad ones, the hopeful ones. She can't explain it. Just that something inside her keeps breaking open. One night, after everyone's asleep, she finds a dusty box in the back of her closet. It's filled with old notebooks, college sketches, poems she wrote and never shared, dreams she never said out loud. She sits on the floor reading them by the light of her phone, and something pierces through the numbness. Not nostalgia, recognition. She remembers a version of herself that wasn't edited for approval. A self that created without permission. A self that didn't need to be understood to feel alive. And in that moment, she doesn't decide to blow up her life. She doesn't book a retreat. She doesn't post about it online. She just breathes. For the first time in years, she breathes as herself. And in that breath, something becomes undeniable. This isn't a breakdown, this is a return. As Shams Tabrizi wrote, every breath is a chance to be reborn. But to be reborn, you must die before dying. Anna doesn't know what's next. But she knows pretending is no longer an option. You are not Anna. But maybe you have a drawer, a notebook, a whisper. Maybe the resistance in you isn't a wall, it's a gate. The kind that only opens when you admit what you've been avoiding. The life you have may be comfortable. But if it costs you yourself, it's not enough. And the voice you've been trying to silence? That's the sound of your soul trying to come home. If you've ever held the life you built and wondered where you went in it, say so. Leave a comment. You're not alone. Because the moment you stop pretending is the moment your real life begins. You followed the path. You kept your promises. You did what was expected, but now something doesn't fit. And no matter how much you try to realign, push through, stay grateful, something in you keeps slipping sideways. Like your soul is trying to make a quiet exit while the rest of you keeps performing. You're not depressed, you're not ungrateful. You're done pretending this version of you is the truth. But then the doubt arrives, disguised as logic. Maybe you're just tired. Maybe this is what adulthood feels like. You've come this far, why stir it all up now? This is resistance. Not because you're broken, but because you're standing at the gate. The gate between your survival self and your soul. You're not having a crisis, you're having an encounter. And in that encounter, something starts to burn, not from outside, from within. It doesn't begin with rage, it begins with restlessness. A dissonance that spreads, a tension between your outer life and your inner knowing that grows unbearable. That's the fire. It burns through false alignment. It burns through old roles. It burns through the architecture of a life built for approval, not for truth. You start forgetting things. You lose your appetite for small talk. You find yourself staring into space more often, distracted by something you can't name. You try to fix it, but it resists fixing. You try to explain it, but it refuses logic. This is not a malfunction. This is a molting. Everything that was never yours is trying to fall away. Every mask, every script, every identity you wore so others could breathe while you held your breath. As Francis Weller writes, the work of the mature person is to carry grief in one hand and gratitude in the other, and to be stretched large by them. You feel it now, both hands full. Grief for the life you built on borrowed blueprints. Gratitude for the fire that finally refuses to let you lie to yourself. This is the paradox. The more you lose, the more real you become. The more you let burn, the more you begin to breathe. The more the old falls apart, the more the new begins, not with certainty, but with silence. Because what comes next isn't a plan, it's a presence. A pulse beneath the ashes. You're not being destroyed, you are being revealed. If you felt the heat, if the life around you is starting to smoke, you're not alone. Leave a comment, say what's burning. You never know who might be waiting to hear their own fire spoken out loud. This is the part where the false love ends and the real one begins to rise. What remains after the fire is not silence, it's clarity. You're still smoldering, still uncertain. But for the first time in years, the noise is gone, the noise of proving, of posturing, of being someone else for the comfort of others. And in that clearing, a voice begins to speak. It's not loud, it doesn't demand. It simply says what's true. You've heard it before, in fleeting moments, in childhood dreams, in sudden flashes of knowing you dismissed as nonsense. You buried it under should, and someday you called it unrealistic or sensitive or strange, but it never left. It just waited. Now in the quiet, it rises again. At first it's vague, just a pull. You're drawn to things you can't justify. You open a book you forgot you loved. You sit by a window and let yourself stare. You write a sentence that feels like home. You walk into nature and your breath deepens, not because you're trying to meditate, but because your body finally isn't at war. You begin to trust the pull. You realize you don't need a full plan, you just need to stop betraying the whisper. You listen more. And the voice becomes clearer, not instructive, intuitive, not strategic, as sacred. This is not reinvention, it's remembering. Remembering the self that existed before adaptation, before applause mattered, before survival made you someone smaller. You begin to say no, not to punish others, but to protect what's real. You say yes, not because you're supposed to, but because your soul leans forward when you do. You start creating again, not to be seen, but to feel. And in that creation, something happens. You feel intact. Not perfect, not finished, but present. There's an old saying from the Gospel of Thomas, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. This is the moment you begin to bring it forth. The words, the art, the boundaries, the truth. The parts of you that went quiet to keep the peace are starting to sing, not loudly, not all at once, but with enough strength to stop apologizing for existing. You were never meant to live edited. You were meant to live expressed. And now the voice inside you is no longer a whisper. It's a compass. It doesn't promise certainty, but it promises alignment. And alignment feels like peace you don't have to earn. If something in you is stirring, if you've heard that voice beneath the wreckage, speak it. Say it in the comments. That's how we recognize each other, not by how perfect we look, but by how honest we've become. This isn't the middle of your life. This is the beginning of your truth. It doesn't feel like a revolution. It feels like a quiet return. You're not reinventing yourself, you're remembering. You're not chasing something new. You're removing everything that was never yours. This isn't transformation in the way the world sells it. There's no dramatic reveal, no triumphant montage. No audience clapping at the end. It's smaller than that. It's the way your breath slows when you speak a truth you used to swallow. It's how your shoulders drop when you say no without apology. It's the soft, steady feeling of doing less and becoming more. But just when you think you've arrived, the resistance returns. A whisper you know too well, this is too much. Who do you think you are to live like this? You're making things harder than they need to be. But now something in you sees through it. That voice isn't wisdom, it's memory. A memory of when you needed to be smaller to stay safe. And now you're safe enough to grow. James Hillman once wrote, "The soul would rather fail at its own life than succeed at someone else's." And that's what you feel now. Not confidence, not certainty, but alignment. You no longer reach for what sparkled. You reach for what resonates. What once felt like achievement now feels like exhaustion. What once felt like ambition now feels like noise. The old economy of validation doesn't move you anymore. The applause has grown distant. The approval that once defined you now feels like a cage you left unlocked. You begin to move differently. Not faster, not louder, just freer. There's a moment, brief and unremarkable on the surface, when you walk into your living room and sit in the same chair as always. But this time something feels different. It's like standing barefoot in a house you built but never lived in. The room hasn't changed, but you have. And now, for the first time, you notice where the light falls. You feel your own weight in the space. And you realize this was always your home. You just forgot how to enter it. This is what it means to come back to yourself. You stop over-explaining, you stop over-performing. You stop outsourcing your worth to people who never really saw you. You say less but mean more. You do less but live deeper. You feel joy, not as a performance, but as a birthright. You no longer crave reinvention, you crave integration. Not to become someone else, to finally become whole. And slowly, everything you used to chase begins to slow down and turn toward you. This is what they never told you. Life doesn't begin when you're young and loud and hungry for attention. It begins when you're finally still enough to hear your soul say, "There you are." If you felt that moment, if even once something in you has whispered, "This feels like home," leave a comment, say it out loud. Because someone else is standing at the edge of their old life, waiting to hear their own return spoken through you. You don't need to be new. You need to be true, and you already are. They said life begins at birth. They said it begins when you graduate, when you marry, when you have children, when you succeed, when you retire. But now you know better. Life doesn't begin when the world hands you a title. It begins the moment you take off the mask. It begins when you stop curating your personality for comfort, when you stop bending your truth to fit the room, when you stop editing your soul into something smaller just to survive the story you've outgrown. Life begins when you stop pretending, not all at once. Not in a dramatic, cinematic climax. It begins the first time you say no without guilt. The first time you wake up and realize you don't need to prove anything today. The first time you choose peace over performance. It's the moment you stop reaching for validation like oxygen. The moment you realize your worth was never in how many people clapped, but in how honestly you showed up. Life begins at 40. Not because it's the second act, but because it's the first time you're finally choosing the script. You are no longer performing your life, you are living it. You speak now without translation. You walk into rooms without armor. You sit with yourself and feel present. Not perfect, not finished, just here. The grief hasn't disappeared. The fear hasn't gone silent. But they don't drive anymore. You carry them like old companions, honored but no longer obeyed. And this is the freedom no one advertised. The freedom that comes not from having everything, but from needing less. From choosing depth over display, stillness over speed, truth over approval. You become someone others recognize, not because you're louder, but because you're real. Not because you shine, but because you're not hiding. And when people ask you what changed, you won't have an easy answer. You'll just smile. A smile that comes not from certainty, but from congruence. Not from knowing where it's all going, but from knowing you're no longer walking away from yourself to get there. This is where your real life begins. Not when the world sees you, when you do. If this journey felt like yours, if these words felt like memory more than insight, share them. Leave a comment. Speak the part of you that's been quiet too long. Someone else is listening. Someone else is on the edge of their old life, waiting for permission to begin. And if your voice is just now returning, subscribe. We'll walk the rest of this homecoming together.